What's it like making movies for 40 years?
It's a long time. Well, the joy of making movies is when they're done, you see them with an audience. And this is an audience that I think will enjoy these movies a lot more than they would if they were watching them on their computer.
I want to say that our evening is long tonight. And many of you, we made the option for you to buy one movie or two, and most all of you bought two. And where this comes from is, sincerely, your movies, Matinee specifically, which was about the culture of going to the cinema in the 1950s. And can you talk about what it was like as a child going to the theater, what it entailed, and then how that affected the movies you made?
Well, when I was a kid, movies were sort of like going to church for me. In fact, they were a lot better. You might imagine going to church. Somebody rapping on the knuckles during the movie. It was a great time because in the 50s, all movies were made for almost everybody. Almost anybody could see a movie. There was no R-rated movies. It was kid friendly, and they made it even more kid friendly by this vanished tradition called the Saturday Matinee, which was that they would run on Saturdays. They would run two pictures, maybe two old pictures, or maybe new pictures if they were suitable, and kids would get into the habit of going to the movies every weekend, and it would make them, as they grew up, moviegoers. And they got them into the habit. Now, sometime around the late 60s, early 70s, they realized they could make more money by not having movie matinees and just running whatever they were running. And we lost something. We lost a whole generation of kids who were movie men and were rabid to see movies. And now there are people encounter movies for the first time, mostly on television. And certainly in the 50s, we saw a lot of old movies on television. But there's no substitute for seeing a movie with an audience in a communal experience where you enjoy it because it's being enjoyed around you. And the kind of movies that I make are sort of made with the idea of people munching popcorn in mind. And I'm sure there's some people munching popcorn as we speak.
Now, the movie we're watching first is Gremlins. Now, someone told me a story very quickly. They were like, they saw the movie 7 times when it came out, and they didn't want to. It was just that everyone kept taking them. It was like the movie that you had to go to, and then they had to go again, and they had to go again. So by the 7th time, they said that they just started repeating the dialogue. They had memorized it. And I know a lot of you Maniacs, you do this, and you probably brought or dragged someone with you tonight, and it's really unfair of you to repeat the dialogue before they can experience it for the first time. So I want to make sure that you're keeping it to yourself. But we have something very special with this version of Gremlins.
Well, presumably, I would imagine a number of you people have already seen this picture. But you probably haven't seen this version of the movie, because this is the preview version of the picture. This is the movie that we took to San Diego to gauge whether or not anybody was going to like it. And I can't tell you that the studio was very enthusiastic about this movie, which they basically they made the movie because they wanted to keep Steven Spielberg happy. And it cost a lot of money, so they said, let them do it, how bad could it be? But when we went to San Diego, and the audience reaction was off the charts, and they were up on the ceiling, and they were screaming and laughing and yelling through the whole movie. And all of a sudden, little cash register noises started to sound. So maybe there's a way we can merchandise this. In particular, the first time they saw Gizmo, they realized realized we made a big mistake. We got to merchandise this movie immediately. But they still never really much liked it. But then when we had the preview, it was, it went over great. Even so, they still thought there were some changes that should be made. And some of which I agreed with. And what you're going to see tonight is you're going to see the version that we ran in San Diego, which is slightly different, not majorly different. I mean, you haven't seen the movie before, it really won't make any difference which version you see. But if you have seen the movie, it might be interesting to try to keep track of the differences that you see between the movie that you remember and the version that you're going to see here.
This is a scary movie. And it really did change the MPAA.
Well, it was rated PG, and it was advertised with a poster that looks very much like E.T. And people took their kids saying, "Oh, look, there's little fuzzy critters in this movie." And so they brought their kids, and they didn't realize that, little fuzzy critters were going to turn into horrible green monsters that blew their nose on the curtains. And so there was a little controversy about that. And in the sequel, we have a scene where a mother drags her child out of the movie, screaming that this is horrible, it's worse than the first one. And that was based on an actual event that I saw at a screening, where a mother came roaring out with her kid, and the kid did not want to leave. And she was crying and yelling, she didn't want to leave, and she got away from her mom, and she ran down into the theater and hid. And so the mother had to stand next to me in the doorway and wait for the movie to be over to go pick up her kid. She was really pissed. But the kid she was fine. It was like she loved it. So there was always a little concern in this movie about, there's a microwave scene, and what if Johnny puts his little brother in the microwave? But these are all kind of people who just don't understand children, and don't understand how smart they are, and how they're not stupid, and they don't do terrible things unless they're psychotic. In which case, this movie didn't cause it.
So, the PG-13 rating.
Well, they decided that after looking at this and then looking at Indiana Jones, ripping somebody's heart out, they said, well, we better have an interim rating, we better have a PG-13. And I don't believe that they've ever re-rated either of those movies. I think they're still officially PG movies. But it wasn't a bad idea. It wasn't a bad idea to have an interim rating, so you didn't have to cut your R-rated movie, to shreds to get PG. So it was ultimately a good thing, but it did change things.
So the 35mm print that we're watching is the only one that exists.
Family print.
And so for those of you that don't know about it, we have an actual projectionist in the booth. His name is Jeff. And we have two projectors up there, and they will be, just like Fight Club. You'll look up in the top right-hand corner, and you'll see, what are they called?
Cigarette burns.
There we go. And I always think that when you watch a 35mm print, it's like seeing the actual painting. When you fly to a museum, there'll be scratches on it, or it'll shift from one reel to the other, and you know that this print has existed longer than I've been alive even, perhaps, right? So this is very, very special for Joe to let us borrow this from the Academy. Is there anything else you want to say before we start the movie?
No, I mean, if you've seen it before, you'll see it again.
So I would like to say that we'll be back after the movie immediately. We'll have a Q&A. Then we're going to have a little break where you can watch the Key and Peele skit about Gremlins 2.
On your phone.
That's right. And then we'll come back and we'll have the screenwriter of Gremlins 2, Charlie S. Haas, and he will be here. here with Joe, and we will introduce Gremlins 2. And then after that, we're going to have a little special career tribute to Joe. And then after, yeah, you get it. This is what
You'll all be at home in bed by then.
This is what Movies for Maniacs is sincerely all about, is all of you coming together. Please make sure that you turn your cell phones off. You piss off a Gremlins fan. You don't want to do that. There's nowhere else you need to be or talking to. Gremlins is quite layered, and we'll talk about the movie after the screening. So thank you so much for coming out, Joe and everyone here. Joe's got a little envelope in his hand, and I would love to thank Sophie Caldas, who created these screen prints. Supposedly they used to give away like dishes and cups at the movies and would lure people back in so they could have an entire set of cutlery, and so hopefully this is a once in a lifetime.
We're going to run my entire oeuvre here, all my movies, and she's going to do cards for all of them.
That's right. Thank you, everyone. How many of you have never seen the film before? Raise your hand. All right, great. Yeah, you should cheer for them. They're younger than you. Now, hopefully some of you noticed some of the differences. Quite dramatic difference. Joe, you just told me.
Well, one of the major ones, when Steven Spielberg fell in love with Gizmo and decided that Gizmo should not, like he did in Chris Columbus's script, turn into the bad gremlin after half an hour. He should stay around and be the hero's pal. That love affair culminated in him wanting to do some reshoots to beef up Gizmo's role. And one of them was, in this version, as you saw, Billy is the one who opens up the shades to kill the gremlin. But in the reshoots, Gizmo does it. And you can imagine how happy Zach Galligan was about that. But there's some other changes. You know, the scene with Judge Reinhold in the vault, which is not in the movie. And then we found that Polly Holliday, who was such a good actress, was making her character a little too sympathetic when she started lamenting about her husband and how he was gone. She said, oh, Donald, and we had to take that stuff out, because if you want to do a Wicked Witch in the West, you can't give her sympathetic moments.
Well, that brings me to, there's so many things to talk about. One is the puppetry. The puppetry and the special effects, which clearly a lot of filmmakers have gone back to, recently even. And this is a real art, and I would love for you to talk about who you worked with on this, how long it took.
Well, we shot the movie in the standard amount of time that you do for a movie, but then we shut down because we needed to gear up to do all the stuff with the puppets that involved actors. We tried to shoot at the beginning of the initial shoot, but more complicated scenes like the bar scene with lubricates and stuff, we pushed that all till the end because we were constantly doing development on the puppets. There were things that we were expecting that they could do and they couldn't. We had marionettes, which there are still a few shots of marionettes left in the picture, but they just didn't work, so we didn't use much of them. Getting Gizmo to move around and walk was very difficult. We cut grooves and rugs and did all this kind of stuff. And we managed to, once we put him in a little car, it was like, okay, how do we get around? But for the most part, that just wasn't a technology that was available to us at the time. And so we had to be constantly reinventing the technology as we went. And the reason we shut down was so that we could rebuild the Gremlins that had fallen apart, and also just do a separate shoot that wouldn't cost us a lot of money with actors and makeup people and sound people hanging around. And we did like another month of just Gremlins. And shot at different speeds and shot at different, with different techniques. I mean, all the stuff on the sets was all done on sets that were raised up, and underneath the sets they were puppeteers, and they had video monitors that were reversed because people were used to seeing themselves in mirrors, and they would do all of their puppetry underneath the set, or behind a chair, or behind the walls, or behind, wherever we could hide them. And of course, today we wouldn't have to do that. Today you could have the puppeteers actually right next to the puppet and do a great performance, and then you could do another pass and you could eliminate them. Well, we didn't have that technology, and so we had to do it the hard way. And so a lot of what you see in the film is the result of what we could get away with, what we thought we could make believable. And there were so many things that we just couldn't until 5 years later, when we did the sequel. There were many things that we were able to create that we just had no way of doing the first time we did it.
What about the voice actors? Because, I mean, it's almost like music. Not just when Gizmo's singing, but it's like a constant shattering of Gizmo as well as all of the Gremlins. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, a lot of us did voices. I did some voices. There's a whole list of people who did Gremlin voices. Mainly Frank Walker, who was a very class guy who's does so many cartoon voices. He's almost Jimmy Won't. And we had other people. We had people like Michael Winslow, who gets a credit, but we didn't use any of his stuff. But once you call them in and you record them, you gotta give credit. And so we were constantly at the mix, using things, throwing them out, getting somebody else to doing the live mics at the mix. I did a whole bunch of stuff myself just on the live mic to make it fit the scene that we had shot. And it was, and the sound people did a remarkable job. I mean, it's a really good sound mix, and the sound effects, many of which are kind of from the Warner Brothers cartoon library, are very good.
Do you know who did Gizmo's voice? Great.
Howie Mandel, back when he had hair. Howie did Gizmo's voice for both of the Gremlins movies that I did, and he specialized in a sort of a baby voice that he had done before. And part of the appeal of Gizmo, obviously, is that he's very much like a baby. And I think one of the reasons that people have warmed to this movie over so many years has been Spielberg's decision to not have Gizmo turn into the bad girl, but to have him stick around and be a hero's pal, which caused us no end of grief because he didn't come to this decision until a month before we started shooting, and all we had was this little puppet full of years, and it was like, he's got to be the star of the movie now. And so we had to do a crash course. We had to build a giant Gizmo, which was a frightening thing to see.
Wait, how big?
Oh, his wingspan and his ears was. And to be in the same room with him was like big. But it's in my humble opinion, it's the key to what made the movie work at the time, and the main reason why the picture is still thought of today.
Okay, that brings me to, I was the exact age for this film when it came out, being 8, and
not to make me look older.
There's something about the script, and I have to say that it's all of your movies, that they're kids' films, but as you said earlier, they don't treat kids stupid. And they also teach a very dark side of the world, questioning authority, questioning the way the country works. The script of Gremlins to me is so smart. And there's always another interpretation. I teach the movie in my film classes. There's always, each character seems to be going through their own unreliable narration. Like everybody has a fear, it feels like. And I'm curious how much you're aware of doing that while you're making a genre film.
Well, Chris Columbus originally came up with this idea because he had a mouse in his bedroom. And he didn't know when it was going to land on his face, or it was going to poop in his bed, or whatever. and it sort of led, it's much like Walt Disney created Mickey Mouse, it sort of led him to doing this script, which he actually wrote as a spec script, which is something we say in the business, means that you write it not expecting it to be produced, but just show people what you can do. And it made its way to Steven Spielberg, who took a liking to it and decided to go ahead and make it. And the version that Chris had originally written was much darker than this one. I mean, the Gremlins, they killed the dog, and they killed the mother, cut her head off, and bounced it down the stairs. There was a scene in McDonald's where all the people were eating, and none of the McDonald's. And obviously, once we decided to make a movie out of it, he said, well, this is going to be a very small audience, R-rated movie, unless we can, broaden the audience for it. And that's when it became a more, quote, family-friendly, on the surface, movie.
Yeah, the depression during the holidays. You have so many references to other movies in the movie, and I feel like you are making films that like Frank Capra was making, where it looks fun on the surface, and yet there's these really heavy undertones. This sort of leads me to how you made Small Soldiers. You taught me how to question the military. As a kid. Each of your movies, I want you to talk about, perhaps, does this have anything to do with you starting with Roger Corman? Why are you so weird?
Well, I grew up in an era when airplane flew over, we all tensed up because we thought it was going to drop a bomb on us. So we were taught to question authority by Mad Magazine, by science fiction movies, horror movies, and comic books. And it was a lesson well learned, particularly when 3 Mile Island happened. And then we all went, hey, see, this atomic power thing, ready, kill or what? We're supposed to be our pal. And now he's like, gonna blow up the world. Questioning authority is not a bad thing. And I think that if you put that message in a movie, even subversively, it's a good thing.
Now, I think, Ray, we have you around here with a microphone. I'd like to open it up to some of you Gremlins. You are a wonderful audience, by the way. Can we give it up for the 100th anniversary of the Castro Theatre? Great, so if you could raise your hand, and Ray will come on over to you. We'll start off right here in the front.
Hi there, I have a question I think everyone here is going to want to know the answer to. About 6 years ago, there was a screening of Gremlins here at the Alamo, and Chris Columbus was there, and he mentioned that he was working on a script for Gremlins 3. Have you heard anything about the status for live-action Gremlins 3?
Only what you've heard. And we hear it like every month and a half. But to my mind, Gremlins 3 is on the way. Gremlins 3 is now called Secrets of the Mogwai. And it's a show for HBO Max and Cartoon Network, which I've been working on with some very talented people. And it's a prequel to this movie, in which the Mr. Wing character is now 10 years old in Shanghai in the 20s, and he first meets the Mogwai. And it's very clever. We ran it at the Annecy Film Festival in France to great acclaim. And they've done 10 episodes, and they were, without even seeing the pilot, they booked 10 more. So it's something I'm proud to be associated with, and I think hopefully answers the Gremlins 3 question at least for a while.
And is this right that Steven Spielberg made sure to check with you about the series?
All I know is that when the guys were presenting a bunch of stuff to Steven, they said, "Does Joe like it?" And they said, "Yeah." I said, "Okay."
Good.
Yes, I just wanted to, first, this is maybe the first film I ever saw in my life, and I'm a filmmaker now, so first, thank you. Two, the second movie is rightly praised for having a very satirical, subversive element to it, and building on Jesse's last question. You see it here in this one as well, but I don't feel as if this one was written about in the same way. Am I correct in that? It's really, there's so much critique here of, rapid commercialism and expansionism, the fear of other countries, that kind of thing. Was that picked up on at the time in the press?
Well, listen, I almost got to be on the cover of Time magazine because of this movie. And if it hadn't been for the Falkland Islands, I would have been on the cover of Time magazine. Because they did a huge spread on this thing the week it came out. It was very well the reviews were great. People really responded to it. They didn't necessarily think of it as a movie that they needed to think about. They just thought it was entertaining and blah, blah, blah. When it came time to make a sequel, for which there was really no reason to make a sequel except for the fact that they wanted another one, I said, well, we should do something different with it. And we should make something that's completely opposite of what we just did. But the same, but opposite. And Charlie Haas will explain a little more when he comes out. But neither of these movies were taken very seriously critically when they came out. They were just movies that came and went. Over the years, as people do, they tend to analyze things. And now that we see things in movies that weren't taken seriously when they were new and are now considered classics. So it's like fine wine. Movies have to sort of age,
It's a great question, and I just want to follow up on that. The Invasion of the Body Snatchers being on the television, or It's a Wonderful Life, or those were entertaining films for the Depression or perhaps the Cold War, and I just want you to know that your movies are in the same category.
You could say I'm a depressed Cold War.
All right.
Was Howie Mandel the only choice of Gizmo? And my other question is, why did the snow and the alcohol not cause the Gremlins to repeat?
Well, that's a very good question. And interestingly, we shot an explanation for that. That the Glenn scientist character had a scene where he explained about the temperatures and stuff. But it just seemed to be kind of irrelevant, so we dropped it. It's not even in this version. But it was something we were aware of. It just was sort of like it became a kind of beside the point. And as far as Howie goes, I don't remember anybody else being in the running for that job.
In the back.
It's super awesome to be able to see, a 35mm print since it's becoming exceedingly rare for this kind of events. How do you see the future for film archival and restoration, since most films are being made digitally? There's not really an actual celluloid film. Do you see any risks in the future for how we preserve film?
Well, I think it's difficult to preserve film only digitally because the digital temperature changes so often. There were D1s and D2s and D3s, and you had to constantly recopy your movie before you could, and after you copied it, they got kind of fuzzy. Film is the best archival medium, there's no doubt about that. And I've seen some recent rediscoveries. The 1953 Invaders from Mars has been restored recently, and it looks terrific, better than it ever has. And there are still people, the noir people are doing a terrific job. Eddie Muller is doing a terrific job trying to restore some of these old films that people were never even released in America. It's great to do it digitally, and it's great to be able to have it digitally and be able to watch it at your home and have it look great. But for posterity, I don't think there's anything to beat film.
Hi, thank you so much for showing this rare treat to us. My question just was, how important was it for you to get Charles Jones a cameo in the film and early at the bar scene?
I had met Chuck Jones at Telluride when I was there, and of course I had always been a big fan. And we hit it off. And Chuck Jones is the Warner Brothers animation director who directed a lot of classic post-war movies, including Walk After Walk, and he's a legend basically. And he was in person. He was sort of like Mark Twain. I mean, he was just a really bright guy, really philosophical. And when we hit it off, I thought, well, why not? I'll put him in the movie. Why not? I'm doing a movie at Warner Brothers, and he used to work there. So we did that, and then he was in Inner Space, and then he did the opening titles and end titles for Gremlins 2. So it became one of my best friends.
I want to piggyback on that before we get to the next question is, you made an amazing movie, Looney Tunes Back in Action. I mean, I can't name one that wasn't amazing. All of your films are remarkable. You growing up with Warner Brothers cartoons, maybe this is why you're so weird.
I know the whole focus of this evening is trying to figure out why I'm weird. But if I am weird, I'm weird for the same reasons you people are.
Next question.
Hi, so I wanted to ask about your experience working on the Tower of Terror and what it was like working with the posthumous version of Rod Serling.
Well, not many people know about that. I met Carol Serling, Rod's wife, when I was doing the Twilight Zone movie. And when they came up with this Tower of Terror ride at Disneyland, which I think was then transplanted to the Florida version, it was an elevator drop ride. And it because of some clever projections, it made you think you were dropping further and faster than you really were. And it was all themed around the Twilight Zone. And so we found a guy who did a passable Rod Serling imitation. And we used some footage of Rod from one of the introductions to the show. And sort of transposed it into presenting the Hollywood Hotel of Horrors, or whatever the hell it was, I can't remember. And so they needed a ride film. And the ride film is the film that you watch while you're waiting to go on the ride. And so I got all my friends together. I got Henry Gibson, I got Kathleen Freeman, I got Dick Miller, I got all these people to be in the movie. And then I discovered that Disney didn't have a deal that allowed them to use SAG actors. And so we couldn't do any of the stuff I wanted to do. We had to do it with all non-professionals. But it was fine. It worked out. It was fun to do. And I got to go on the ride for free. So it was good. And I got to get my friends into Disneyland for free, so that was worth it. But it was only a one-time payment. The whole deal with the ride films is they pay you once and then goodbye. But they used it for quite a while. I think the ride is discontinued now.
Hi. Both the Gremlins movies sort of lampoon issues of the time they were released in '84 and then '90. If you were to make a Gremlins movie now, what kind of things would you sort of attack or have a sort of kick to?
Well, there are so many horrific things going on right now. Things that are so bizarre and unfathomable that if you actually had put them in a movie, people would have said, well, that's ridiculous. That could never happen. Are you nuts? I mean, a whole country run by a crazy guy for 4 years? No, it never happened. So, all bets are off. I mean, I honestly don't know how you would make one of those movies now about this ever-changing and ever-worsening situation that we're in now. And I don't think Gremlins are going to be able to save it.
Now that does make me remind any of you who are thinking you should go home, because you're tired?
Exhausted after seeing this movie.
I want to say, I'm just going to say it, Gremlins 2, The New Batch, is the greatest movie ever made. I feel like you've said or written about is how do you top Gremlins?
Gremlins 2.
Question, right?
How do you did the part when the animal was driving the car?
How do we do that?
Yeah.
Well, Gizmo is very difficult, but we did manage to teach him to drive. I got the idea from a cartoon, where a Chuck Jones cartoon actually, in which a small cat rides in a little red car, and so we found a toy that matched the size of the puppet, and we wound it up basically, and just set it off. And the thing when you watch the movie is the dog in the movie actually believed that the puppet was real. And all the scenes, that's why we cut to the dog so frequently in this picture, is because he was so fascinated by this puppet. And so, and there's a scene where Gizmo drives by and jumps. It's like, oh my God, what's he doing here? And it was one of the most fun things about the movie was working with the dog.
Now, there is a Warner Brothers cartoon that Gremlins first appear in. And has anyone seen this?
Falling Hair, it's called. It's a Bob Clampett cartoon, made in World War II. There's a clip from it in Gremlins 2. We were going to put it in Gremlins 1, but it didn't make it into Gremlins 1.
If the Gremlins and toy soldiers were at war, who would win?
Well, you must mean the Gorgonites, because they're the Gremlins would be on the side of the Gorgonites against the Commando Elite. And I like to think that the Commando Elite would lose.
Hi, I was wondering if you could tell us the story behind Up From the Depths, because I really loved that film as a child. And I rewatched it, and I felt that the halves that I really enjoyed you were associated with somehow.
Up From the Depths.
Am I mistaken?
The New World picture.
Yes.
About the resort with the monster.
I found it campy and enjoyable.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. It's one of the worst movies I've ever seen.
Yes. I rewatched it, and its mediocrity was astounding.
This was a Filipino movie that was released by New World when I was there, and I'm sure either Alan Arkish or I did the trailer for it. James Horner wrote the music for it, which is remarkably good for a movie like that. And Chris Wallace, who designed the Gremlins, did a monster for it. But I have this great footage, which I've never taken out of my vault. It says Chris Wallace demo reel, and it was a joke that we gave to him, and it was a shot of him pushing this monster through a swimming pool, and the camera constantly panning over to see that it's a monster pushed by a guy who's in a swimming pool. Awful stuff. And this was to make the movie better. This was reshoots to improve the movie, supposedly. I have to give it to you. It's the first time anybody's mentioned that awful picture in any production of the whatsoever.
So I have a question in regards to Baby Yoda, how he kind of like ripped off Gizmo, like it was just like Gizmo.
Microphone here.
Maybe by peeing one.
I have an observation and a question associated with it. I first saw Gremlins in 1984 on the MGM lot, an employee screening where I worked. And in the scene where Phoebe Cates tells the horrible story of Christmas, I was the only one in the screening room laughing. And I still remember that moment, and it was very validating to hear the reactions in the My question is, how did you direct that scene? How did you get that so pitch perfect that it was sincere on the screen and over the top as it landed?
Well, I didn't feel that that character was really developed, and Phoebe, who was a lovely person and a wonderful actress, I think she felt that she didn't quite have enough character for her part. So we gave her this speech, which is originally written by Chris Columbus for a character in the McDonald's scene that we didn't shoot. And I thought she was just brilliant. It encapsulated everything that I was trying to say about the movie, which is that if something terrible happens to somebody from far away, it might look funny, but if it happened to you, it wouldn't be funny. So there was, shall I say, a negative reaction on the part of the studio to this scene, but Spielberg said, well, let's take it to the preview and see what they think. And as you see, it was still in the preview version. And the movie was very, very successful at the preview. Nobody complained about the scene. And yet, after the preview, they said, boy, this is a great picture you got. All you have to do is cut out that stupid scene. It would be so much better. And I said, no, I'm not cutting it. And they said, well, we're going to get Spielberg to make you cut it. And so they went through it, and they said, you got to have him cut this scene. It's horrible. People will leave. And he said, it's his movie. Leave it. I don't get it myself personally, but just leave it. And it turned out to be a talking point that was big enough for us to make a parody of it in the sequel. But I think it's one of my favorite scenes in the movie.
Sorry to question. This turned into a bit of a controversy amongst my friend group. Do you consider Gremlins to be a Christmas film?
Just as much as Die Hard is a Christmas film.
And this is Christmas in July, so I can't think of anything nicer.
Hello, I was wondering if you could just share your thoughts on the state of movie theaters today and keeping film alive at historic movie palaces like the Castro.
Well, I mean, the fact that you're all here says something. I know this place has had a somewhat checkered history in the last couple of years. It's, I think, a major part of the arts scene in San Francisco. And there are very few theaters like it left. I mean, this is a single screen theater with a lot of seats. And obviously the difficulty of operating it is in a world where people are afraid to go to the movies because of COVID. And many theaters in Hollywood have just shuttered their doors. I mean, there's literally Hollywood, the birthplace of motion pictures, has like about 3 or 4 theaters left that you can go see movies in. You have to go, otherwise you have to go to Glendale or Burbank or somewhere else. And this has happened all around the country. But I think it's a major part of the reason why movies have become such a part of our lives. And I fear that the new generation who are not seeing movies in theaters are getting used to the idea of seeing everything at the push of a button at home. And that's not why we grew up loving movies. This is why, right here, this group of people and the questions and the reactions and the movies, and that's what movie-going is about. And if we don't have that, I think we're going to be losing something important.
Let's stop at that point because I want you to stay. We don't have any ins and outs, please. We do have drinks and snacks to support the theater, to support the Castro. And we're going to bring out Charlie as Haas, the screenwriter of Gremlins 2. We're going to bring Joe back out. We're going to watch Gremlins 2 in 35 millimeter. And then for you maniacs that are going to stick around after that, I have a special surprise following that. So we really are taking over this theater like we just saw in the movie. It means so much to me that you came out to support this. Can we give a round of applause? Great. And as I said before, if you can pull your phones out during break, and I would love for you to watch Key and Peele's Gremlins 2 skit. It will be very helpful for you before we start the movie. See you in about 15 minutes. A very ironic sentiment of movies being so bad that they're good. And over the years, I have found that to be not what I feel. I find these movies to be neo-sincere. It's a concept that's post-irony. You could make fun of the movie because it was a low budget. You could make fun of the movie because it's a big budget. But maybe the filmmakers knew what they were doing. And maybe you're laughing at the film before you think about it. And Gremlins 2 is one of those. Many of you, it's up there. You love this film. Now, Key and Peele made a skit just recently, sort of exposing these two, and I would love for them to talk about it with 100% creative control over this interview, because that's what they had when they made the movie. This is Charlie, and this is Joe. Please give it up. How did you do this?
Whenever anybody asks me about the Key and Peele thing, I say, that's exactly how it happened. Which of course isn't true. How it happened was that they begged me to do a sequel to Gremlins when they got money. And they put aside their disappointment at the fact that it made a lot of money, because they didn't particularly care for it. And they said, well, we'll just swallow our pride and we'll make another one. How about it? And it was a particularly grueling movie to make since we were inventing the technology as we went along. And I was really tired, and I said, I don't want to see another puppet as long as I live. No. And so I went off and did other things, and they persisted. They came up with a whole lot of different writers and different takes, and trying to figure out what to do with the Gremlins, which, making a sequel to a movie they didn't understand in the first place. Led them to ideas like Gremlins Go to Mars. So none of those things worked out. And eventually they came back to me, like nearly 5 years later, and said, we really want another one of these movies, and if you'll guarantee that you'll make it for next summer, we'll let you do whatever you want. Whatever you want. Major studio, Hollywood, whatever you want. How can I turn this down? So then of course I had to decide, now what do I want? They wanted the same movie over again, with maybe different actors, or a different location. New York, how about that? It won't be the same place, it'll be different. It'll be about the same movie, but different. Anyway, that wasn't what I wanted to do. And Mike Fennell, who had produced Gremlins, and I had to come up with somebody that we thought could bring something brand new to this franchise. And Charlie, who has written 3 of the best movies that I ever made, Runaway Daughters, Maniacs, and Gremlins 2, was called in to help us figure out what to do with this carte blanche that we have been gotten by Warner Bros.
I had a chance to pitch this job, and I had a phone call with Mike before we met, and he said, what I can tell you is that for the sequel, Joe would like to get out of the small town. On the other hand, if you have the puppets running down the street in big cities, it's going to be unproducible. So you have to find a way to contain them somewhere. And secondly, we would like to see some different monsters this time, some variations on the basic Gremlins. So I thought about it, and I came down, living in Oakland, I came down to Burbank and met with Joe and Mike, and started talking about, you know, the office building of the future where nothing can go wrong and where we could have sort of a contained physical place, and maybe the genetics lab and coming up with different monsters. And instantly, Joe and Mike just started coming back at me and saying, oh, well, yeah, I mean, the guy who owns the building he's like Donald Trump, he's like Ted Turner, he's got a cable TV network in the basement, he's, you know, we can have a Gremlin that talks, we can do all this stuff. And I was just sort of scribbling to keep up, because these guys were so inventive always, and so generous with the invention that it really made it possible and sometimes even fun to do the project. So that's how we got started.
And because we wanted to get Rick Baker to do the Gremlins, and he did before, he balked at it because he said, well, you know, Chris Wallace did the Gremlins, and if I come on, I'm just going to be copying stuff that he did. He said, but if I could do new Gremlins, if I could do something different, then I might be interested. And so that's where the genetics lab came up, because it was an opportunity for us to create different designs, different concepts, different gags with the standard Gremlins that we had before. And so that
I'm sure you'd be like,
and he was very very helpful and contributed a great deal to the movie in terms of ideas of how to do Gremlins, what kind of Gremlins they should be, and how they could be worked. And the technology improved over the past 5 years to the point where Gizmo didn't have to be carried around. He could actually walk around. And this was very liberating for us, because we were able to do a lot of things that we had only hoped to do in the first movie and then had to stop because we just didn't have the technology.
Can you talk about Rick Baker, what he had done before for a lot of folks, legend growing up in this time period? What movies had you been working with him on or inspired by?
Well, Rick has probably got more Academy Awards than anybody else in his business, in the makeup effects business. He is obviously well known for American Werewolf in London, for which he won an Academy Award. And he also worked on so many different movies that Wolf, I mean, just high-grade, not B movies. He started with B movies, as we all did, but then immediately graduated to A movies because his techniques were so entrepreneurial, and he was so good at what he did, and he created a whole following group of people in a laboratory and the whole thing. So he was a one-stop shop. If you went to Rick, you got all of his people, and they were some of them the same people who worked on Gremlins before.
How much involvement did Spielberg have with this?
Steven was pretty hands-off, actually, as he had been on the first movie, because when we did the first movie, he went to Sri Lanka and made his movie. And, you know, he didn't come back until we were done shooting. And then I remember sitting behind him in the screening room, and he's watching the rough cut for the first time, and he's going like this. So I think it turned out to be a little wackier than he had imagined. But then when this came up, it was obvious that he was ceding the responsibility to us. He said, look, they made the first picture, and he must have told this to the studio. They made the first picture, leave them alone, they'll do this, they'll get it done, and they'll get what you want. And so he was, I don't remember him, other than coming up with a couple of ideas, like maybe a Sergeant Rock character that would come in at the end and save the day, which we didn't do because we were so over schedule, had so many pages, that I don't remember him being that involved in it until the studio saw it, and they told him, just have him make it shorter. So I went through with him and we cut some stuff out. But otherwise, I don't remember him having a great deal to do with it.
Okay, so this, we're in the office, you're thinking up all these new creatures for Rick Baker. What's it like? What's it like working with this weirdo?
You know,
It is again.
it was great, but you know, for all that I said before, I was slow on the uptake. It took me a while to understand, in terms of tone, just how far Joe wanted to take this in terms of having fun at the expense of the first movie, having fun at the expense of America in 1990, you know, and having fun generally. I came in one day, I had been working on the John Glover character, Daniel Plant, the guy who owns the smart building. And I said, gee, you know, I have some pages, but I think the Clamp character, you know, he's turned out to be pretty broad. And Joe said, how broad? Can we get Danny Kaye? And this was an important moment for me because I sort of began to understand where we were actually going with this. I still can't believe we got away with it, but we did.
One of my favorite movies is Hell's a Papa, which is a movie that unfortunately has been out of circulation for many years, but you can find it if you try. It was based on a stage play in which literally anything could happen in the stage that night, and they would drive trains through the building. There was a guy who ran around with a tree. First it was a plant, and then it was a tree. It was crazy town, basically. And it also played with the idea that you were watching a movie. It always was talking about the fact that you're in a theater, you're watching a movie, there's a projectionist, and he's projecting the movie, and sometimes he gets you out of frame, and one person's at the top of the frame, one person's at the bottom, and they're talking to each other. I mean, I thought it was wonderful. And I wanted to get some of that madness into this movie, which would be completely unexpected because, you know, the first movie, although it's a little weird, is a traditional movie. And in this movie, we wanted to not be a traditional movie. We wanted to break the fourth wall as often as possible, which unfortunately is something that studios really hate. And so we had to fight for all of it.
And so what was the reaction with reviewers at the time?
It got very good reviews. But the problem with the movie commercially was they announced it for Memorial Day, and they ran TV ads, and then they were in the mixing room or somewhere looking at a print, and I got a call from the head of the studio. He said, "We're changing your release date. It's now in July." And we said, "But you're already running TV spots." And he said, "Well, but we think this is better." And it turned out later that they were afraid that Dick Tracy, which was opening in July, was going to make more money than Batman, which was their big, you know, record breaker. And they said, well, that can't happen, so let's take the Gremlins movie and throw it up against Dick Tracy and keep them from making a lot of money. That's the actual reason why they changed the release date. And unfortunately, by the time the release date came out and the TV spots ran again, people said, oh, isn't that movie already been out? Isn't that movie already played? And so it didn't make as much money as it should have. But the reviews were, there were double truck ads in the newspapers saying how brilliant it was. But, you know, not enough people won.
Now you wrote Matinee. Give it up to Mandel. And those of you that haven't seen these films, don't feel ashamed. Just write it down. You can go home and watch it tonight. Tomorrow. Can you talk about Matinee and the love of movie theaters yourself?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Matinee was the project that the three of us did after Gremlins 2. There was in that case there was an existing script by Jericho Stone, and then Ed Naha had done some number of drafts. And basically it was about kids who go to a Saturday afternoon horror movie matinee. And you know, we wanted to do something a little deeper with it. And so, and when we had worked on Gremlins 2, we had talked a lot about William Castle. Because I remember a conversation where you said, you know, it would be great if we could have some kind of effects in the theaters the way that William Castle did. And Mike said, you know, but William Castle opened movies in like 100 locations. You know, we can't do the things you could do. But it stuck in my mind about William Castle. And I started to think also about the Cuban Missile Crisis just being, you know, because of that period, and because of that interplay of horror movie fear and real fear, and you know what you like to be scared of and what you're really scared of, and we sort of developed the thing from there. And so the decision to have it in Key West at the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and to have this character, John Goodman, who was very close to the castle, you know, that was a desire to have it be kind of a meditation on that experience of going to see a monster movie.
I said this before about Joe, is that you all taught me about politics as a kid, and it shaped me in so many ways. So when I think of your films, it's profound popcorn. That's the only way that I can think of this, is we're all in for a treat to get to watch Gremlins 2, but this is why it's time to think about them and not just roll your eyes at how, you know, ridiculous it is. I'm sure some of you have some substances in you.
In San Francisco?
And so it works on both levels, right? And people laughing or people even crying sometimes at how subversive your movies are. I feel I need to tell you that you're amazing. Both of you.
What you forgot to mention about the original version of Matinee was that it was a haunted movie theater, and there were vampires and projectionists, and you know, it was a completely different movie than the one we ended up making. And I think ours is better, frankly. But as far as Gremlins 2, I don't know how many of you have already seen it, but there are certain aspects of the movie that were very controversial in the studio, even though they had said I could do whatever I wanted. But they really balked at the idea of reminding the audience they're watching a movie, which is the thing they just fear the most. And they let me, as they had promised they would, they let me have a preview of my version of the movie. And so the version you're going to see is my version of the movie, because it worked.
Which, by the way, right, we heard Orson Welles referenced over the radio in the first film. Orson Welles had 100% creative control over Citizen Kane, so I do not feel I'm overstating how special this film is. We also have a very fragile and beautiful 35mm print. Can we give it up here for Jeff, who will be projecting it? These prints really are one of a kind, and so every real change is extremely monumental and special, and so many of you have come out tonight celebrating the Castro's 100th anniversary of screening movies. Joe is 75 years old. I'm saying it right now. I'm not looking at him.
Is that necessary?
It is, because you have changed my life, and I know you've changed many people's lives in this room, and I want you to hear it and know it and keep it.
Is that supposed to make me feel better about being 75 years old?
Yes. And if everyone, could you please thank Charlie here for being an absolute maniac. There wasn't 9 people in the room writing the script. It's just these guys. And now that we're, 32 years after the film is made, it's time for it to get the full respect that it truly deserves. Is there anything else you would like to say?
No, I think you've said it all.
Thank you all for coming.